Welcome to your Daily 5 for Tuesday, January 7th, 2025. Among the wave of announcements that you will get this week because of CES happening, one of the things that caught my eye was an article over on Ars Technica that mentioned that Dell is getting rid of some of the most well-known names in computing over the last, 10, 15, 20 years? I don't know how far back these all go, but Dell will no longer be using the following names in their computing products: XPS, Inspiron, Precision, and Latitude. Now, if you've used a computer for any number of years, you've at least probably heard some of those names. And again, some of them have been around for a very long time. I don't know if the Ars Technica article that I'm going to link to here says it. I didn't notice it, but it may be in there. But I think it is actually one of the smartest moves Dell could make, because I think at this point, all those names were really just confusing. So what they're going down to is essentially three different lines of computers: Dell, Dell Pro, and Dell Pro Max. And if those sound an awful lot like Apple names to you, that's because they're pretty much exactly the same. I actually didn't know why they had called their top-end line Dell Pro Max. I thought, why add another word in there? But then I thought, well, Dell Max doesn't sound very good when you say it, so I understand why they went with Dell Pro Max. The plain Dell is very much like what you would consider, I guess, a MacBook Air, like the MacBook, the base level. And then, just like Apple, they step up from there. And then I did see something about that within each of those lines. There are then tiered naming things underneath there, which seems really stupid, but I guess they have to do that. But I really do think this is a very smart move, because there were times where I was trying to figure out which computer somebody should get, and to have the four different things that you had to bounce around. I mean, don't get me wrong. Once you started looking at the specs, that ultimately was the thing you really cared about, but it never really made sense from a marketing perspective to have this many different names for a computing device. And I think also the fact that the PC market and the computing market in general has constricted post-COVID. I think that's part of it too, is they realize they don't really have a justification for making this many different types of computers. But I think in terms of what the consumer sees, it's just nothing but benefit, because it now is very easy to differentiate between these things. Basically, if it just says Dell, it's, I don't know if you would say low end, but it's the lower end. Dell Pro is basically going to be the mid-tier, and Dell Pro Max will be the upper end. Again, very much like with what Apple does. And I think that only benefits Dell, because, all those names. But it is the end of an era, because for years and years and years, you knew those names. I mean, the Dell names were very recognizable, even if the word Dell wasn't there. Once you heard XPS or Latitude or even Precision, Inspiron too, you already knew what it was. Like, you had an idea of what you were dealing with. But I do think it was cumbersome and clunky, and it was long overdue to strip this stuff down, because at this point, I don't think most people... And the other thing is, computing has become so streamlined anyway. The spec differences don't really matter until you get to a certain level. And so underneath that, it's kind of like where basically the recommendation for almost all normal people or standard computer users is to just get, if you're going to buy an Apple, just get the MacBook Air. It covers 90% of what most people do. And then after that, you start to do things by degrees, because you have to determine what your needs are. Well, I think Dell's going to be the same thing. And honestly, at this point, with Intel collapsing, they probably just want to strip down how many Intel chips they're getting too, or AMD, however they're going to go. I do not know what the 5 to 10 year outlook is going to be with Intel in the state that it's in. So I feel like there's a lot of things that are involved in this naming change or update or revision or whatever you want to call it. But even if it is purely from a marketing perspective, I am in total agreement with it, because, again, having four different names for computers, nobody is going to want to wade through that. Certainly not people who don't have any experience with computers and just want something simple and want a easy-to-understand idea of, okay, this means this, this means this, this means this. At this point, you have three different types to pick from. And I think following the Apple example, pretty much literally the Apple example with the naming, that was also smart, because it does tell somebody, okay, you don't want to go with an Apple, you want to stick with the PC. Well, here is our equivalent, more or less, of what those would be. So, this feels long overdue. And even though there's a part of me that's kind of like, wow, there's going to be no more of these anymore, when so much of my life I've had these computers around in one way or another. But I do think it's a good idea. Again, I don't know what it's going to look like with Intel in the state that it's in, but just purely from a marketing perspective, I think Dell has made a overdue but very smart decision. Later.